Hello and welcome everybody to another horror hangout where we talk about the best and worst horror movies of all time, and sometimes get very lucky and get to chat to some people bringing some new horror films to you. My name is Andy Conduit-Turner, and you'd be very forgiven for thinking I was in some way a variant or related to the person we're not, but as far as we know, we're not. I am here today with Kiah Roache-Turner, director and writer of The Beast of War. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very good, sir, and it's so good to be talking to a distant cousin. There's a lot of us Turners out there. It's
Yeah.
it's great to meet another Turner who likes
Yeah,
films.
very few something Turners though. I've only met one other, and I'm married to her. So very nice to meet yourself.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that I'm a Roach Turner. That means something else in America. Like when I say my name in America, they're like, "What? Wait, what are you?" And I'm like,
No, I
"Oh
think
God,
it's got. I think it's got a nice edge to it. I think it's excellent work.
good for a
Um,
horror filmmaker who makes films about monsters." Yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
I mean, speaking of, I think it's only fair that we start on that one. You are a writer director who has a storied history, but you've this isn't your first foray into horror. People who listen will know you from Sting, of course, and the Wyrmwood films before that, as along with many other things. Where did it all go wrong? How did horror get its hooks into you?
I think it just happens when you're a kid and you're afraid of the dark. And, I was an anxious kid. I think most horror filmmakers are. People get the idea that we're serial killers and dangerous. It's like, no, we're scared little boys and girls who
Yeah.
wanted to sleep with the light on. And so I just got to know fear really well. So fear as an aesthetic and as a narrative device is something I just feel very comfortable in. And so I think it's a natural fit for me to do horror. I think even if I was to look into other genres, it would always be passed through, the aesthetic of horror. Um, and so I'm happy to do it. And one of the things about Beast of War is like, I'm like, I always wanted to make a war film, but it's hard to get films made these days. And if I wrote a war film, it probably would be very difficult to finance. But if I put a shark in it, um, they'll let me make it. And so I've sort of started doing that now. I'm just looking at genres that I want to have a crack at, and I just put a monster in it, and it becomes easier to finance. Um, and yeah, it certainly worked in this instance.
And a phenomenal story. For people listening at home, I'll give them a quick overview. So, The Beast of War features a group of Australian soldiers during the Second World War. Their carrier ship is sunk out in the Timor Sea, and then they find themselves adrift, hoping for rescue and getting the attention of a shark. For those particularly tuned into it, reminds me of Quint's origin story almost, right?
Mm.
When he goes on to Jaws. Where did you grab onto this story from? Because I know it's a basis in reality, right?
Yeah, it started with Quint's origin story. Like I just watched Jaws 100 times, and like when my producer rang me up and he kind of goes, "Oh, can you write something on water? I've got access to a tank." I'm like, "Well, that sounds like a shark film." He goes, "Great, I'll call you in a month." And like that's just sometimes how films start. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, if I'm going to do a shark film, it's got to be Quint's origin story. That monologue is one of the best things in history, and we've all been waiting for that film. Like a real dark horror version of that film. And I knew I couldn't make that film because I didn't have $85 million and Nicolas Cage to star in it. So I did like 2 minutes of Google research and found this true story of the HMAS Armidale that went down in 1942, halfway between Darwin and Timor. So a lot of Australian soldiers went in the ocean, and a lot of them were just munched by sharks, and it was brutal. And like most of them were just never seen again, but some of them were able to kind of hop between the debris and jerry rig like a motorboat attached to their raft and get back to close to Darwin, and then they got picked up. And I'm like, that's a story I want to tell. And so I knew I couldn't really tell that story with those characters because it would be disrespectful to make a piece of genre entertainment based around the tragedy of what those men had to go through. And so I just was inspired by instead of based on, and did a lot of research into it to add a little bit of research, a little bit of sort of research realism, but basically just made up my own insane version of that and just made sure that it was, commercial and, dark and horror enough and fun enough to tell the more fun version of that real life tale.
Yeah, and you do a lot of wonderful work with not just the shark, we will come to the shark, but there's a great deal of focus on the human characters.
Mm.
and their relationships here as well. For me, I was just talking to my co-host before we came on. I felt it would pair wonderfully with if you're in for a double bill in coming weeks in cinemas, pairing this with something like The Long Walk and the relationships we see there as well. Very different relationships, of course, but how did you focus on bringing those characters together? Because you do focus before we get to the time at sea on land, establishing their relationships and conflicts as well, right? Is that something you really wanted to dive in on so we cared about them when they're out at
No,
sea?
no, it's interesting you mentioned the long walk because I mean it's a cliche to say. Like my favorite director is like probably Martin Scorsese, which is a cliche, and my favorite writer is Stephen King, which is a cliche. I'm sorry, I'm not original, but the reason I like Stephen King is not because of the horror. People are always like, "Oh, you know, he's such a great horror filmmaker," but the thing I love about him is his character work. I mean, look at Shawshank Redemption. Like, who cares more about a character than those two leads? You know, played by Robbins and Freeman. And he does these long runs of just character exposition and character history, and he's got this beautiful way of telling these epic personal tales, so that by the time a killer clown turns up, you love these people and you don't want them to get eaten by a zombie, you know. So that's what I try to do in my writing, and it's the hardest thing I do in my writing. I find the horror stuff and the set piece stuff really easy. It's just so easy, like it just flows. But the character works hard, and you really have to work at that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to put this 10-15 minute sort of training montage at the start of the film, which now that I think about it is I probably copied that from Kubrick and, you know, Full Metal Jacket. But you know, in Full Metal Jacket, you get to know these people and you love them. So when they go over to Vietnam, you care about Joker and you know who he is and you know who he was and you can see the soldier he's trying to be, but you know he's just this scared little kid who got his head shaved and you know now he has to pretend to be a soldier and like we have this 10-15 minute sequence at the start where we show the group that we're going to be sitting with on that raft for 70 minutes. We show who they are as a unit. We show who they are as people, you know, who's vulnerable and scared, who's probably going to be good in this situation, you know, I Leo, the hero, who's going to be a problem, you know, the racist Des obviously pops up and I wanted them to work through all of these issues that crop up in the training sequences on the raft. Because at the end of the day, the shark pops up and eats people, but there's not much you can do with a shark in terms of character development. So if you're dealing with this kind of film, it's about the people, it's not about the monster. And so, yeah, it was important to get all that character work right, you know?
And let's talk a little bit about Leo. How do you go about casting a role like this? Because obviously it's an ensemble cast, but Leo is very much positioned as kind of your point of view character. We
Yeah.
see a little bit more into his thought processes and the things that are going on, and he's definitely your hero that you're rooting for. How did you go about writing that character, and how did you find Mark to play him? Was he an obvious choice, someone you already knew?
Yeah, I didn't cast Mark. I wrote it for Mark. So I've been wanting to work with him for years. I think he's one of our best actors for many reasons. You know, he's got like a real kind of Robert Mitchum vibe to him. He's a star. He does all his own stunts. He's a free diver, so he can dive down like 10 meters and hold his breath for like 3.5 minutes. So like I kind of needed that too. So if he didn't say yes, I would have been stuffed basically. But yeah, like a lot went into his character. He's the we tell the story through his eyes. He is a character, you know, he's a man who previously was a fisherman off the coast of Broome, and you see that his younger brother was killed by a great white shark. You know, when he's teaching him to dive, and he has a lot of guilt around that because he probably shouldn't have let this small boy dive. And so he's also connected emotionally in a real way into the shark, the concept of the shark, and so him fighting the shark and hopefully saving this other young soldier who he's befriended is a way of him, sort of dealing with his past and also dealing with the guilt that he holds for not being able to save his brother. So, you know, maybe he can save this guy instead. That's kind of his narrative arc. But also, it was important to me. You know, my grandfather died in the Pacific in World War II in Papua New Guinea, and I looked through his letters, his war letters, to see what kind of guy he was. So a lot of who Leo ended up being is based on my research into my grandfather, because my grandfather just seemed like a really good bloke, a natural leader, a brave guy. He was a teacher, so he's just a good, solid, salt of the earth person. All his mates liked him. He was a guy who clearly they sort of huddled around him in war because he saved lives. But in the end, he was killed, and it was a tragedy. And I kind of wanted to tell that story too. So yeah, there was a lot of personal stuff that went into the creation of Leo.
Yeah, and it's wonderful when you see these stories. I mean, particularly from a filmmaking point of view, and it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It is just a thing, but we see a lot more sort of European campaign for certainly for European and American audiences as well. So you can often think that some of the terrible and very brave things that soldiers and other personnel did in the Pacific campaign of the Second World War, we see represented less on film. So for me, my own granddad was heavily involved in the Navy during the same time. We were
Mm.
lucky enough to get to meet him, but he was like a submarine test pilot and so on back in the days. And it's wonderful to see some of these stories and recognizing that while they're not the same things that you see represented on film, that there was a whole other side that maybe people have that are nowhere near as familiar with. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, one of the things I wanted to do too is, I mean, obviously I wrote it for Mark, and Mark's an Indigenous bloke, and I hadn't really seen just an out and out Indigenous war hero in an Australian film before. Like they've played great parts and they've been great films, like that featured Indigenous people and sort of covered a little bit of the culture of that. But I just hadn't seen just a rip roaring old fashioned 1950s Indiana Jones Indigenous hero, and I'm like, I want to write that character. I want to see that, and it was great because that could so easily have turned into something that felt a little bit farcical, but Mark played it so real that he really did have like a Robert Mitchum vibe. And it's like, this guy is an old fashioned hero, and I believe him. And it was fun for me to kind of do that. And I got to work with Wayne Blair, who's a brilliant writer director over here, and Mark Cole Smith was also an Indigenous consultant, and they came in and they helped me with the cultural aspects of that, and really helped with some of the storytelling. Mark's a great writer in his own right, and he actually added a lot of bits and pieces that um, ended up in the script. So I think he was the one who added the idea of, was it, he had that line, it's all right to be afraid.
yeah,
Fear can, what does he say? Yeah, fear can keep you alive.
yeah.
It can also get you killed. And it's like, that's his line. And I'm like, oh, that's a good, can I put that in? And he goes, yeah, of course,
Yeah, it's
why did I, that's why I
the
said it
dialogue
here.
between them, and I think it's so nice that when we're watching the film, there are moments of incredible tension, and like you could be forgiven for writing everyone feeling quite hopeless in some of the moments of the film, none of which I want to spoil here, but there is still a lightness to some of these guys. They have a moment where they can keep people's spirits alive by giving a flippant comment, by saying something that tries to bring them together. And I think you captured that very nicely in the opening scene where the group is drilled on the fact that you live or die and you succeed or fail based on sticking with your mates and making sure that everyone is together and looking out for one another. And I love how that camaraderie comes across when they're out on the raft. Um,
Well, mateship is a sacred thing in Australia. Sometimes, in a way, culturally, it goes beyond brotherhood and beyond family. Mateship is such an important thing for us, I guess, because, when we all first came out here from Britain, like we were criminals and we were, just in an arid, scary landscape. And, it was a dark, bloody history for many reasons, the Australian history. And so we had to make friends quickly so that we could all survive. And so mateship is a real thing, in Australia. And also, because I grew up with brothers and I went to all boys schools and stuff, like I had some real dodgy friendships when I was a kid, and we were in life and death situations sometimes. And it's so funny how much a group of young men laugh when they nearly die. And like, the first instinct is to laugh and go, man, we nearly got hit by a goddamn truck. And it's like, and then you laugh and then you talk about it for the rest of your lives and you always laugh. And it's like, I guess that's a way that men in particular combat fear, is to laugh about it. And from what I understand about the British and the Australian troops, what I've read is they laugh all the time. No matter how much blood and guts they're covered in, humor is the way that they got through it. So to not have that in the film would have been just like telling a lie. So humor had to be a part of this story.
Yeah. And like I say, for me, no spoilers on content, everybody, but spoilers on opinions when I get round to posting a review on this one. I really liked it. I'm gonna have some thinking to do. I suspect, Kia, that this is gonna trouble my top 10 movies for the year. I've really, really enjoyed
Wow.
this. And
Yeah,
we've had such a
that's
strong year as
huge.
well.
It's a very strong year, and it's like, yeah, it's you try so hard as a filmmaker. The hard part is, you want to be Scorsese or Spielberg or whatever, and you release your little independent film, and you realize immediately you get rated against like The Godfather or Dune, and you're just like, oh man, like, yeah, it's really hard to get your film noticed given how many, just genius masterpieces are out there, So even to have somebody vaguely interested in your little film feels really good, and especially somebody like you who clearly knows what they're talking about. It means a lot that you say that. Yeah, so thank you.
I'm looking forward to recommending it. My wife will not come and suffer every horror movie I watch with me, but she is a huge fan of a shark movie. So we're going to go and sit down and watch this next time she's free as well.
My wife
Yeah.
hates horror films, though, and it's funny because I'm a horror filmmaker, but she watched this one and she liked it. She was like, "This is the best film you've done." Yeah, I think because it's got some poetry and it's got some pathos, and it's got Mark Cole Smith, who's very good looking, and that helps.
Something for
But she
everybody.
really liked it, yeah. And she doesn't like this kind of film, so I'm just like, "Oh, that's kind of cool."
Yeah. And you saying also now it's all coming full circle that you mentioned that you're a Stephen King fan. You get the psychotic bully characters that then you get people standing up to as well for some great moments of heroism as well. So yeah,
Everything I write, it's from Stephen King. It's like I think I just reread his books all the time. I've read Salem's Lot like 10 times, It 10 times. Like it's all I do is reread King. So if I'm ever good at what I do, it's probably because I'm copying him.
yeah. If there's an influence, there is certainly a good one. I mean, we've talked a bit, about Beast of War, but like, I would be remiss not to say you've covered other monsters in your time with Wyrmwood, you've covered infection and zombies with Sting, you've covered what is essentially a spider-like character. You're not necessarily leaning, you are hitting off some of the stereotypes of the dangerous animals that folks from not from Australia will imagine you
It's
encounter
yeah,
every day.
zombies, demons, giant spiders, and sharks, and I'm
Yeah.
just making my way through the monsters movie by movie.
Yeah.
you know.
And so for your local Australian fauna as well, is there any others on your checklist? Are you thinking crocodiles next, or one of the most wonderful parts of Australia's history, you have the Great Emu, or you could make a horror film out of?
Um, Crocs, I mean, I've kind of done sharks, like that would be treading similar water, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And like you get to the end of a water-based film and you're like, I
no
don't
more
ever
water.
really want to make another. I mean, look at Spielberg. He made the greatest shark film ever and then never did it again. But he's like, I'll do dinosaurs because there's no water involved. Um, uh, but yeah, I weirdly the thing that I would love to do more than anything is and this is something I was talking to Mark about is I grew up very much steeped in indigenous myths and legends because they
Mhm.
used to teach it at school in Australia back in the 80s. And so there's some pretty gnarly indigenous monsters out there. And for me, I would love to be able to tell a story in the dream time. I'd probably have to co-write and maybe co-direct with an Indigenous person because it's not really my story to tell. But yeah, to me, the idea of just setting a film 100,000 years or 60,000 years in the past, in an Indigenous tribe fighting. There's one particular monster called the Quinkin, which is like the cicada god. So when the cicadas are screaming and then suddenly they stop, that's when the Quinkin's out there and it's going to come out and it eats children and has red eyes and kind of it's like 9 feet tall. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty scary. That's nightmare
I'd
fuel.
like to do that.
So,
And
and it'd be great to do something like Apocalypto where it's like in language, you know what I mean? So like,
that would be
like, yeah,
incredible. Yeah, and I
yeah,
guess as well
I live for that. Yeah.
for the time period, you'd have an entirely indigenous cast, I imagine, therefore.
100%. Yeah, I'd just get to work with all these amazing indigenous artists. But like, there's a lot of cultural stuff going on at the moment. I'm not even sure I would be allowed to do that, because yeah, it's cultural appropriation is a thing, and so yeah, I would love to tell that story because I remember reading that story when I was a kid, and it scared the crap out of me, or reading those legends, But yeah, if they could ever allow me in any capacity to tell that story, I would love that. Yeah.
But you
So
certainly
anyway.
sound like a filmmaker who is conscious of these things and obviously is so focused on treating them respectfully and representing them in the right way as well. So I hope you find a way to make it work. With an eye on the time here, I want to make sure we've definitely said out loud that Beast of War is going to be in cinemas, select cinemas around the world, but also on VOD as of October 10th. So by the time we release this interview, just a few days away. Um, do you have anything, the particular countries where you have the widest distribution that you're aware of? Is it mostly US, or will we be able to see things
US
Australia,
is the
UK?
big one, because it's 300 million people. So that's the one that, you really concentrate on those markets. But, obviously Australia, this is a very Australian story. I mean, in terms of markets where we do okay, it's the usual suspects of Italy, France, and the UK. Like we do quite well in Britain. Britain loves a good horror movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
so fingers crossed. And this is an accent you guys might recognize a little bit. So maybe we'll get some Brits coming to watch this one too.
Oh, I certainly hope so. And I find it's very familiar for us. Obviously, so much of our entertainment is
Yeah,
from the US. But when I walked in, or when I sat down and we saw films like Talk to Me start, there is a certain comfort. I mean, obviously, people broadly in an English-speaking film, they speak English, but there's a certain reflection, a certain familiarity in that opening scene in Talk to Me where the brother walks up to the house and shouts, "Oi," which people don't
yeah.
shout in the US, but
Well, you get so used to the accent where it's just like, "Oh my God, did you see the size of that thing?" And you're just like, "Yeah, okay." But when somebody just goes, "Bloody hell, mate, that was big," you're like, "Oh,
yeah,
that sounds a bit like my dad,"
yeah.
And it's you relate more. So it's nice when a film like this comes out for Aussies and Brits, because we get to see kind of our people on screen. And uh, there's a laconic humor that we share. American comedians are really, really over the top, whereas for us, funny is less.
Hmm.
And so I'm about to swear, so I apologize, but one of
That's
my
okay.
favorite moments is, in the first shark attack when this guy just gets munched and it's so violent and horrible. And this guy just goes, well, this is fucked. And I'm just like, that's mad. You would never get that in an American movie. You know what I mean? Like, it just wouldn't. It'd be like, oh my God, we've got to get out of here, or something like that.
Yeah.
I just love that laconic, dry underplay. So it's always fun to make a film in my own accent.
Yeah. Plays very well for us over here as well. I'm sure people are going to really, really enjoy this. Not just my opinion, but if people want to catch up with you, the film, what's next? Where are the social media is not what it used to be? Where are the best places to keep an eye out?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm 46, like I'm an old man, so I'm still just like on Facebook, but I'm on Instagram and stuff too. Um, But yeah, I mean, it sort of pops up. I mean, hopefully, I'll be making an announcement about the next film in the next couple of weeks, and so that'll go out through the usual channels. So it'll pop up somewhere. But yeah, I'm actually making another war film. I just
Wow.
loved this so much. I got to the end of this. I just immediately wrote another war film and took it to my producer, and he's like, "Oh, another one, is it?" And I'm like, "Another one, man." Just because I loved it was Boys with Toys. That's it's the kind of film I wanted to make since I was a kid, and we seem to do it pretty successfully with this one. And I'm just like, this next one's a very different context. It's set on the Eastern Front. It's got Russian snipers and British troops and Nazis and all those kind of things. And I'm just like, yeah, man, we're going to keep sort of playing in that sandpit.
Well, I can see what you can do with action now. You can sign me up for a ticket already. I am looking forward to it, and we'll be sure to share. You know, there are horrors in war. We can talk about it on a horror podcast. We can cover this for sure.
Oh no, this is a horror film. Like it's got guns and
Right.
explosions, but this is a monster movie. I won't say what
Oh,
monster, but yeah, it's because I grew up watching even things like Michael Mann's The Keep, and I mean I love that stuff when you've got soldiers and war and like like all those high stakes war stuff, war bits and pieces, genre bits and pieces. Then you throw in a monster, and it's like yeah, this has everything I like. Pass me the popcorn.
amazing. Yeah, well, sign us up already. Kia, I couldn't let you go when we're talking on a podcast called The Horror Hangout without putting you on the spot and saying, right, it's a horror hangout round at your house. You're inviting a mixed crowd round. Pressure's on you because you're also a horror filmmaker.
Hmm.
What film you putting on for everyone when they come over?
Huh. Well, that's a hard question. I mean, if they're all horror fans, they would have seen all my favorite horror films. But
So it's a
like, if
mixed
somebody was
crowd.
like,
So there's going to be some people who aren't, they're just movie goers. They're coming around to your house for a movie night.
well, there's this sort of holy trinity or quad trinity or whatever. You got Jaws, The Thing, Alien, and The Exorcist. Um, I think those are the ones that to me are the greatest. Like they're all perfect for different reasons. I'd be hard pressed to pick a favorite one. I'd have to look at the crowd and work out which one. Are you guys kind
Spin
of
a
fun?
wheel.
You want The Thing? Are you guys like real kind of cinephiles and love gorgeous photography? Then it's probably Alien. The Exorcist is the thing that scared me the most. I mean, again, I know it's a cliche, but I grew up a Catholic, and so the idea of a monster that gets into your brain, like it's not something that's going to reach for you under the bed or attack you from a shadow. It's already in your brain. That terrified me in a way that was just very sheerly Catholic, and it got in my skin, and I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks afterwards. I think I saw it when I was like 12 or something, which is too young, and yeah, it really disturbed me, and it still disturbs me even when I think about it today. So I think that's one of the great horror films ever made, The
Sounds like a
Exorcist. Yeah,
great choice when your guests come round. Well, I
yeah.
know you've got more of these to do, so I will let you stay on schedule as best we can. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. Thank you to everyone out there for listening. Watch out for Beast of War when it comes on cinemas or VOD, October 10th. Take it from me, you'll enjoy this one. Get out and get stuck in gear. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me.
Thanks heaps, Andy. I really appreciate it. And thanks for taking an interest. Like when you guys take an interest, it really helps with like a little indie film like this. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Right. Cheers, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andy.